Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Greg Koch, Clinical Director at the Center for Learning, and I'm joined today by Dr. Mary Goodarzi, a postdoctoral fellow, and also Dr. Diana Karju, a clinical psychologist here at Center for Learning. And we're really excited to be here with you today to talk about how you can best support your child as we go through this really difficult time in our lives. And I say in our lives because this COVID-19 pandemic, I think, is something that as parents, and we're all parents here today talking to you, have never really experienced. And it's also a kind of situation where I think as parents, it's even difficult to come up with analogous situations we could tap into to try to understand and explain this. And we have had to deal with parents with a great deal of fear and uncertainty. And I know our primary concern as parents is if we're struggling, how is our child doing? We know that some kids tend to weather crises, or this could even be looked at as a kind of trauma going through this pandemic. It's entailed great changes in routine with kids having to stay at home. Kids have been hearing all this different kinds of information. And of course, for their ability to process it and understand it is much different than ours. And so we particularly want to be speaking to you today about how to support your kids, especially if you have any kids who are showing kind of like undue anxiety. Maybe for the first time in your child's life, you're seeing them as very anxious. We also, or you might have a child who's been anxious ongoing, and this has presented yet another challenge. So we want to try to think of how we can walk away from this with our children strengthened rather than undermined by this whole situation. So let's start off with I'm going to just kind of pose some questions to Dr. Goodarzi and Dr. Karju, and then they can share with you some of their wisdom. They're both practicing therapists, and so they have a great deal of experience and wisdom to tap into. So Dr. Goodarzi, what are some age-appropriate ways to explain COVID-19 to our children?
Great, thank you. All ages need a story to understand their experience. If they don't feel in control in some capacity, they will act out in their behaviors and actions. That's what we know. So for this coronavirus COVID-19, for kids 4 and under, it'd be helpful to say a story like this. You've probably noticed lots of changes going on, not just at home, but in a lot of different areas. Here's why. There's a germ like a cold, and it's very jumpy when people get too close to each other. So that's why everyone is staying at their own homes, so the germ can't jump from house to house. This is why we are home and not going to the park, not seeing Granny or Grampy, not going to see our friends. I know it's a lot to think about. What do you think about this? So you keep it very short for all ages, but specifically for kids 4 and under. Now for kids 5 and older, the story can sound a little bit like this. You've probably noticed lots of changes going on, not just at home, but in a lot of different areas. And you've probably heard the word coronavirus. Let me tell you what that means. Virus is like the flu. Very quickly, which is why we're all staying at our own homes. If we all stay home, then we can stop it. This is why we can't do many of the things we're used to doing, and I know it's frustrating at times. But if we stay home to stop it from spreading, it won't jump around to so many people. I know it's a lot to think about. What do you think about this? And remember, silence is okay. It means that it's a way of them processing the information. Most likely, they'll bring up questions later in regards to these stories.
Great. And so I noticed that you came up with stories and try to make it real for the children, less of this abstract kind of thing. So almost creating characters for it.
Exactly.
By the way, we are in our remote locations observing social distancing, and at times you may see our internet connection get a little bit choppy. So this is our new reality. But thank you, Dr. Goodarzi. Dr. Karju, what is it about the COVID-19 pandemic that makes it kind of like uniquely stressful to kids? Why is this different than any other thing, adversity they might encounter in their life?
Right. Well, the thing that makes it unique for our children is exactly what's making it unique for us. We've never really been through anything like this. And so, the children not being able to go to school, not being able to, see their friends, all of this is stressful for them. So as parents, we may think, oh, well, they're not going to school. They don't have to worry about getting up early or put on their uniforms or what have you. But in reality, this change is pretty dramatic for kids. Their whole life is really about, getting to school and spending 8 hours in classrooms and having a very kind of routine. And so what we're seeing is that, what we want to take into consideration, obviously, is that just like we're stressed with the unknown and not knowing, how to kind of deal day to day and what's the new laws going to be, what are the new restrictions or what have you, our kids are struggling with that as well. And so, we want to keep that in mind as we move forward, and not just assume that, as long as, we're taking care of them, they should be okay. They also have thoughts and worries and concerns about what's going on, just like we do.
Exactly. And how often do we have to deal with these things where there's so much talk about death and the potential of death? And, our kids have probably heard figures tossed around like these tens or hundreds or millions of people could die. So this is something that's very new to them. So Dr. Goodarzi, how is it if how can we tell if the anxiety that our children is demonstrating kind of falls within the normal range or is something to be more concerned about?
So I think it's safe to say that a lot of our children's anxieties are escalating during this time. We're seeing that with behavioral outbursts, clinginess, more meltdowns, even more sibling rivalries if they have siblings. This is where typical behaviors during this time, just like Dr. Karju, Dr. Kogi both stated, this is very a dramatic and drastic change for them. However, worries and anxiety may be excessive if you see your child maybe washing their hands repeatedly, more than they need to, or maybe counting how far people away from one another when they're outside and seeing people walking. If they're continuously asking you questions if everything's clean at home, if they're watching you Lysol the grocery bags when you bring them in and every item, and then want to do that with every single one of their toys. If you feel like that's excessive, if they're worrying if the germ is anywhere near or around them constantly and needs to be cleaned, those are some excessive symptoms of anxiety to look for. And it's important to be watching that and validating their fears and worries, but also building coping skills and a time of resiliency for them. I want to note it's important to look for more withdrawn, isolated, and irritable outbursts. These are important to look for too, because some of our children may be also experiencing symptoms of depressive symptoms right at this time. They're taking social distancing more. It's not social isolation, but it may feel like that for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really a good point too, about when you see some signs in them that they're struggling with sleeping, they're at, these kind of basic indicators of daily living have been transformed. Dr. Karju, anything to add about kids who are, maybe we have a child who we know is anxious already, anything else to think about in terms of how to support those kids?
Right. Well, Dr. Goodarzi really covered a lot of things. One other item I would add is, especially with our families who have worked with Center for Learning in the past, a lot of their children, probably already have forms of anxiety. And so this situation may be exacerbating that anxiety. But one thing, to add is, they may ask a lot of questions, and we want to be cautious about what we share, even though the question is being asked, even of our teens, just what we're exposing them to, what information we're exposing them to, and but asking a lot of questions. And sometimes the other thing of note would be if a negative thought kind of gets stuck in their head. A lot of our kids do struggle with that. My son has anxiety, and sometimes you'll just get an idea and it's very hard to let go of that. And so if you see that they're talking about something and it just kind of keeps coming up, really kind of sitting with your child and taking the time to hear them out, validate their concerns, and help them with information, based on their age, age appropriate information. But information can help. We certainly are not trying to hide what's going on. They know something is going on and they're hearing things. But if, as parents, we clarify and we give them clear understanding of the information, and how sometimes, the media can be a little bit, they want to maybe give it a spin, or depending on what you're watching, whether the information is actually accurate even. So really maybe just checking the news with, kind of a news media that you feel is not necessarily more hype than just news, and just getting information maybe in public, radio or what have you. And just, kind of talking about that, and getting a sense as to how they feel about it. The more that they see that you're comfortable with things, the more that you are able to manage your anxiety as a parent, the more that you're able to, show that you have an idea as to how things are going to move forward, or if you don't know, that you trust that, we're going to be safe and that things will be okay in the end. That will also help really all children, but especially our kids who already struggle with anxiety.
Yeah, and I heard you say some things about being conscious of kind of what kids are being exposed to. Dr. Goodarzi, what is it in the home environment that we should be wary or mindful of in terms of how to create an environment that contributes to our kids' wellness, instead of them being fretting about the virus all the time?
Yes. So our roles as parents are transitioning right now. They have transitioned. We are now so many more roles, right? There's much more asked of us right now. And what will help for us as parents to release the expectations of what needs to be done, and rather focus on what will keep my family calm and happy for our day. So the mantra we tell ourselves, just like Dr. Karju stated, how we manage our anxiety will also become our inner voice and lead our day, just as the way we talk to our children, and how that becomes their inner voice. So I urge parents to not put too much emphasis and pressure on trying that they feel that needs, just to focus on what can, and what gets done is enough, and that's okay, and that's perfectly fine. Right now, we urge you to build your child's resilience during this quarantine time, and strategies that build their inner strength and confidence. We want parents to validate their children's frustrations, to sit with and not try to fix it by distracting or give a positive game choice, but rather our children will feel more heard and more understood if we explain to them that we are feeling the same frustrations they are, and that's okay, and how we cope with that frustration. So our children will learn that they can trust their family and their community to come together in a supportive way during times of crisis, by agreeing to give up comforts and conveniences in the short term in order to create a safer future that will carry that with them as they get older.
Great. And then in terms of Dr. Karju, are we kind of maybe just overthinking this? Is this just something that kids will get through and grow out of? It'll pass, don't worry. Once coronavirus is over, our kids will be great again and everybody will live happily ever after.
Right. Yes, if only. I mean, there are going to be those children who will be able to kind of move through this, and be able to kind of continue on, just, and kind of follow the pattern. And as their parents, get back into work, they'll get back into school, and maybe it won't faze them. But chances are, and the evidence actually shows in general, that if there's anxiety indicated in youth, that you don't really outgrow it. And that it is important to pay attention and to not assume, especially, as parents, we're going to be excited once, God willing, very soon we'll be back at work, or being able to kind of go back to our old activities, assuming that the kids are fine, they're back at school. It really, the evidence doesn't really show that. And this type of trauma can actually stay with you. And so it is important to pay attention to that. And if your kids need extra help, to get that help. Because, as parents, we want to be everything to our children, but the reality is sometimes these things can be out of hand, and can really get in the way of their joy and their success, and their productivity. And so we do want to pay attention to it. and make sure that we pay attention as when they're young, because these things can actually continue on into adulthood, and there is evidence of that.
Yeah, and then I think it's really good to think of this as kids react to situations differently. You may have two children, and one of them may come out of this like thinking like, oh yeah, it was kind of hard, but it was okay. And another child feeling you're just seeing these lingering kinds of signs. We know that with trauma, and once again, this is a kind of national trauma and also feels like a personal trauma that we're dealing with. About 1 in 5 kids or individuals exposed to that will continue to have lingering symptoms. It's probably some of us are just a little more vulnerable to that. So we just wanted to kind of chat with you today and talk about some strategies, some things to look out for. We wish you that you stay well, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Center for Learning if we can do anything to help. Thanks so much for joining us today.